there friends, my name is Rachel, GNS middle, Gilbert and Sullivan is my middle name and my middle name is my last name, and I am here today on behalf of Forebear Theatre to explore the magic of the Gilbert and Sullivan operas by very pedantically ranking every element of them. And today we are ranking the Gilbert and Sullivan operas. We did it, we got to the very end. And I'm going to tell you how I did this in a moment, but first, if you're not already subscribed, please subscribe to this channel. We are going to be posting much more varied content in the future. We'll be doing more musical clips from our shows, mini videos about one specific topic. I'm planning a video essay that's going to come out pretty soon on the differences between the Tennyson poem and Princess Ida, and where I think that Gilbert might have messed up in his interpretation and where I think he did pretty well. So we are going to be doing that. As you can see, I am dressed up in holiday clothes, even though I'm filming this on the 1st of January. I hope that everyone had a very pleasant pagan Yule and any other holidays that you celebrate. I have spent the holiday period mostly looking after my niece because I have a new niece and I got to meet her the other day and I was helping out there. So that's why some of these videos have been a bit delayed, but that's okay. You just get to see them a little bit later. Also, Forebear Theatre would be very appreciative of any donations that people have. We are hopefully, fingers crossed, going to become a charity very soon, so that will become easier to give money to us soon, but we are still very much accepting donations, which will all go towards having things like a costume and a set for our future shows and venues for rehearsals. Things like that are very, very expensive, and that's what gets in the way of people producing art. It's very difficult to produce art these days because everything is just so expensive, and it's typically only very privileged people who can afford to do that. And I would actually include myself in this. I do consider myself very privileged. It used to be before COVID that I could afford to actually drop £5,000 of my own money a year on these projects, but sadly since COVID I've really not got much work at all. So even though I have come from quite a privileged place, I am currently really struggling financially a bit. I'm okay, but it's very difficult for me to fund any of my projects myself, so any help is really appreciated. And we've just received a very generous New Year donation from Clay Hilly, so thank you very much, Clay Hilly, and thank you so much to all of our monthly donors. You are the best and we love you. Thank you. So, let me tell you how I ranked the Gilbert and Sullivan operas going by... Oh, first of all, this does have a little Christmas bobble on the top, but I don't want to sit like that the whole video because it's bad for the framing, so it just looks like cat ears, but that's fine. Who doesn't love Christmas cat ears? So, how I ranked these operas. Let me tell you, this was one of my most pedantic things I've ever done. I tried various different permutations. As ever, what I do is I try something and I see if that works. And if the list comes out like vaguely as I was expecting, I listen to that list, if the list talked, which it does not, and I think, oh, okay, well maybe that is the list. But if something appears really wonky, then I know I've messed up and I need to change something. What happened when I first ranked these operas with the permutation I thought was fair? The Yeomen of the Guard came out in 10th place. I thought, okay, that was obviously not going to work. And I realised why that had happened. It's because with most of my scores, when I converted them to percentage points, they ranged from quite low to pretty much 100%. But when it came to music and musical numbers, both of the categories which Yeomen won in and did exceedingly well in, Yeomen, even though it won music, the percentage mark it got was actually still only about 63%. And that means that there were just a whole kind of 37% of marks that are just completely lost and redundant because nobody was ever going to achieve them. So what I did something which I've not done since my A-level maths, which was normalising. So what I did was I took my range of scores and I stretched it. So I kept the lowest score the same, but then all the other scores, I stretched them out so that the highest score just became 100%. And then all the other scores just stretched proportionately according to where they were on the list. And that actually gave me really good results. And what I did was I did leave myself a little bit of room for diddling, and I'll tell you how I did that. So we have marks out of 20 for music. That's just music on its own. We have marks out of 10 for musical numbers. So that kind of contains music within it, but that's okay because really music should be more than 20 anyway, and music does work its way into some of these other categories as well, as it should. 20 points for dialogue, 20 points for dramatic/comedicness. Then we have, these are the little ones. I did 10 points for the leading roles. I didn't really bother with characters this time. I kind of felt like characters are probably included in the dramatic comedic marks and in the roles. So 10 points for lead roles. So that was all those lead roles I was discussing in one of my previous videos. And I gave 5 points for supporting roles. So I didn't bother including any of the background characters in this final ranking. I didn't really think that was worth it. Then I did out of 5 marks for the chorus, if you remember our chorus video very close at the start. And then I allocated 5 points towards my newcomers video. So I told these newcomers who didn't know GNS at all, well, Dan told them rather the stories for each one, and they ranked which one was best to worst. So they actually had Mikado as the worst and Gondoliers as the best, which it was really useful to me actually, because seeing Gondoliers through fresh eyes made me love it loads more. And so even though people might look at that video and think, oh, well, all that ranking is wrong, I did want to give it some weight because I do think that's important. So I only gave it 5 out of 100, but still, I do think it's important to include. And then I had this last little category that was just 5 points, just for my personal enjoyment. So that just gave me a little bit of diddling room. So I think there was one instance where I really felt like one opera should have gone above another one. And so having that little 5 points there allowed me to do that. And I think that's important because this is my list, and I'm not saying these are the best, I'm not Classic FM, but I'm saying these are my favourites and this is how I would rank them. And I do consider my opinion to be very valuable because I am not only a GNS nerd, I know loads of people that are way more nerdy and knowledgeable about the actual content than I am. There's so much lost material that I didn't know about. I mean, talking to Will and Natan about Utopia Limited, I mean, Will and Natan know so much more about the writing of the pieces and what material was lost and what was cut and why it was cut and who created the roles and who played each of these roles through the years and who's on each recording and the individual recordings. I don't know much about that, but I do consider myself pretty knowledgeable about GNS, you know, above average certainly. But also I am a performer, I'm a director, I'm a professional actor. I am taking my kind of actor brain and directing it towards these pieces, and I do think there aren't too many people that do that. I don't actually know of any other professional straight actors like me who really, really love GNS in the same way that I do. Generally, GNS is populated by opera singers, and while opera singers can act very nicely, it's not really quite the same. And I think you really do need sometimes people who understand acting to play these characters, in my opinion. So, with that in mind, let's get started. In 14th place, which probably won't come as much of a surprise to anyone, is Thespis. Now, I'm going to go through saying probably the worst thing about each opera and then the best thing about each opera. Thespis is just not terribly well thought out. As I've alluded to on previous videos, Thespis was that there was a libretto for Thespis, but it was generally written around the performers that were creating those roles, and the script massively changed throughout the creation of it. And we can tell this because there are so many different libs that exist, and people have updated it and taken out characters and moved things around. And you can just see that there was a lack of focus, there was a lack of care in the writing process, or simply that Gilbert just wasn't as good as he later turned out to be, because people generally get better as they get older and develop their craft. And I think that this is very much Gilbert's first piece. It wasn't really intended to be anything particularly successful. It wasn't meant to run for that long. I think it's fair to say that not as much care went into Thespis as the others on this list. And we've lost the music, so it's very hard to write the music when we don't have it. In the case of Thespis' music score, I just took the musical number score and just used that for the music as well, but it wouldn't have helped it. I mean, Thespis scored 31.62 out of 100, and those decimal points are important. They really did help me in scoring these operas. So yeah, Thespis really didn't do very well. When I normalised the results, Thespis pretty much always came last, so its scores always stayed the same and everyone else's increases. So yeah, sadly Thespis did not do very well here. However, I would say some really good things about Thespis. This is something we discovered last time when we were doing the background roles of the Gilbert and Sullivan operas. Now, Thespis has a plethora of really tiny roles that are very full of character. We've got Timidon, we've got Preposterous, Stupidass, we have Tipsyon, Simon, Prettier, even kind of Daphne. I mean, she's more supporting, but Thespis does just have a really strong ensemble of roles. And you could actually imagine a world where you put on a production of Thespis and the only people on stage are named parts. And it would actually be like enough singers, and that would be really full of life, and it would be like a proper company. And there's something really cool about that. And certainly when I put Thespis on, when I eventually do, I want to take a lot of care to really take the small amount of material that these small characters have and try and get these characters to extrapolate from that material to inform the rest of their performance throughout the opera. And it's not just for the sake of it. I just think when people do that, it generally just makes for more enjoyable theatre. I mean, generally when people have more of an idea of who they are, they have more fun on stage. And that's what I'd want to do with this one. And I think Thespis lends itself very well to that, possibly better than any of the other operas. So that is something that I think Thespis can be very proud of. Number 13, I have given to, again quite unsurprisingly, Trial by Jury. It's a little bit rigged and unfair because it's not a full-length opera, but I would say that maybe the worst thing about Trial by Jury is just its general shallowness. Its characters don't really have many deep thoughts. It's all played for laughs, there's no serious moments, and the thing is, Gilbert is so skillful at getting humour out of tragedy and tragedy out of humour, but Trial by Jury just doesn't really have that, so you do feel like it's missing something. And certainly lacking dialogue, that adds to that. It just means that there's a bit of life that's missing from Trial by Jury. Having said that, Trial by Jury, for what it is just one of the most perfect little parcels of fun you could possibly imagine. I love seeing fully staged productions of Trial by Jury with an orchestra. You hardly ever get to see it, and they're so good. And especially the defendant is such a great character. I don't really think too much of the story as in the judge ending up with Angelina. I find that a bit lazy and contrived. There is a certain amount of contrivance in every Gilbert and Sullivan opera, but the ending of this one especially is a bit, oh, okay, is Angelina okay with that? Fine. So yeah, there are problems with Trial by Jury, but honestly, it is perfect for what it is. And there's a sense in which it doesn't really belong on this list at all. And I don't really want to say many bad things about it. It's just this joyful drop of sunshine. It's constructed really well. Every song transitions into the next one pretty well. There are maybe a couple of transitions that aren't so good, but generally the music is really lovely in it. I don't think it came particularly high for music just because, again, it doesn't really have too much emotional depth, and you can really hear that in a lot of Sullivan's music and not so much in this one. So that is the reason Trial came low on this list, but I do absolutely love it. Coming in at number 12, another opera that I really enjoy, but just doesn't do as well as the rest of the operas on this list, is HMS Pinafore. Now, HMS Pinafore is classed as one of the big three especially in the USA, but I think in the UK as well. Sometimes people add the Gondoliers onto that. But HMS Pinafore is one of the most famous ones, and there's a good reason for that. It's got such a good, simple, clear story with really real, engaging, emotionally complex characters, especially Rafe and Josephine. And it's two arias for Rafe and for Josephine are two of the most exquisite things in the canon, and I absolutely adore them. There is so much good satire in this. I would say the satire in Pinafore is one of the best in the whole canon, maybe even the best. So the satire in this is wonderful, and that's how it got a pretty good score for dramatic comedicness. It actually got a 17.23 out of 20 for its dramatic comedicness, so it did do really well in some of these categories. However, it does rank very low for music compared to some of these other operas. Its chorus was middle of the pack. The sailors did bring it up, but the ladies brought it down. I only gave it, like, my score out of 5, I gave it a 2. I think that's about fair. I do really love it, but certainly I don't think HMS Pinafore would ever be the one that I choose to see if I had the choice of all of them. Unless it had some really amazing director or had somebody in it that I really wanted to see perform. The show itself, I don't think really draws me in so much. Its dialogue was quite middle of the pack. Its dialogue got 12.94. And yeah, its roles, I do like a lot of its leading roles, but some of its supporting roles aren't terribly interesting, I would say. But HMS Pinafore, I will say again, just one of the most glorious, simple stories. The fact that Rafe and Josephine's situation can be applied to any people who are maybe in love with somebody that society doesn't want them to be in love with. And in that sense, it has a kind of LGBTQ plusness that certainly not intentional on Gilbert's part, but it does lend itself very well to the queer community. I think we can all identify with feeling like we're in the wrong place, or we're very different, or that we're in love with somebody we're not supposed to be in love with. I really think that HMS Pinafore is a story that a lot of these people can identify with. Number 11 on this list, and it really does pain me to say this, I do not like the fact that this one came so far down, and I almost did a little diddle to get it above the next one, but then I thought really carefully to myself, and I checked myself and said, look, does it really deserve to be? And I don't know. I don't know if it does. I think will think it should. But this one is Utopia Limited. I almost put it in 10th place and put the next one in 11th place. But I do think that Utopia Limited deserves to go in this spot. It did very well for music and for musical numbers. And it also did pretty well for dramatic/comedicness. But Utopia Limited doesn't really shine in any other category. It doesn't do particularly badly either. I gave it actually a 4 out of 5. That was my own personal mark, so I restrained myself from giving it a 5 because I felt that was disingenuous. Like, if I was presented with every single opera to watch, I think Utopia Limited would be one of my favourites. I'll be like, yes, I want to see that one. But maybe that's like the shock factor of not usually getting to see that, but I do genuinely adore it. But there are 3 that I gave a higher mark to when it comes to my own personal enjoyment, and I felt like that was fair. Utopia Limited's chorus is pretty good. That was roughly middle of the pack. And the lead roles actually got an 8 out of 10. But the supporting roles didn't do so well. My newcomers only gave it a 2, out of 5, and I can see that really. It didn't do so well for the reason that I keep talking about. So it has a great concept and the music is superb, but I do think there's just an element of something missing. This cohesion between Sullivan and Gilbert is missing. And you can really see that there was just a lack of focus and the lack of narrative clarity throughout the whole thing. And certainly the changes that Will and Natan made to when we did it in April, they certainly helped a whole lot. But I didn't really feel it was fair to kind of think of those changes as canon. And even with those changes, I still think it suffers from that same problem I keep talking about. Like, I don't know what Utopia was meant to be like before. I don't really understand if the changes were good or bad. Like, are they good and we're laughing because the doctors and lawyers have no work, or are they bad? So is England good or bad? I don't understand. Is it government by party that's the only problem? Scathio Infantis and Zara, all their speeches that they give about the state of Utopia and what we learn from Utopia in the very first song and the next few dialogues, they're just completely at odds. Having said that, I do just want to emphasise how much I have been impressed by Utopia Limited throughout the making of these videos. First of all, I was just completely blown away by the beauty of the music. I think that it has some of the most exquisite music in the canon. It only came number 4, but I actually think that it might contain some of my very favourite moments. I mean, probably Yeomen of the Guard has my favourite moment. I think, and I'm going to go into that when I talk about Yeomen of the Guard, but Utopia Limited, I mean, the end of the Act 1 finale is spellbinding. And In Every Mental Law is incredible. Quaff the nectar, although of native maids the cream. There's such skill that has gone into all of this music. And I have every confidence that when I direct Utopia Limited, that it's going to be a spectacular show and that everyone is going to understand the story. I'm going to have it figured out, and hopefully with really minimal changes to the version that Will and Natan very carefully put together. Number 10, which was almost number 11, but I decided that it was really fair to give this one 10th place. And this is The Sorcerer. So I'd initially thought The Sorcerer would be beneath Utopia Limited because there's something about The Sorcerer, and I don't think that I'm the only one that thinks this, but it's got a kind of blur quality. So when you ask people what's their favourite GNS opera, I don't think a single person has ever said The Sorcerer. Like, to my knowledge, please correct me if I'm wrong, maybe The Sorcerer is your favourite one. But it does seem to me that The Sorcerer doesn't particularly shimmer in any one place. However, it is consistently pretty good. So its music is gorgeous. And actually, I would say its music is better than the 4 operas that follow it, HMS Pinafore, Pirates of Penzance, Patience and Iolanthe. I think that it's got such spectacular music, especially thinking of the end of the Act 1 finale again, Oh Marvellous Illusion. Things like Sprites of Earth and Air and 'Tis 12, I think. While love the housemaid lights the kitchen fire, which is one of the most glorious moments in the canon. But not only the music, it's also got really funny dialogue. It's got some really great characters, similar to HMS Pinafore. Really, it's Aline and Alexis, and Dr. Daly actually, that I think are really good characters in this. John Wellington Wells, in fact. I think he is often kind of played for laughs and people don't go very deep with him, but I think you really could go very deep with John Wellington Wells and still be very funny while playing him. I do really love The Sorcerer. It's one of those ones that as a result of making these videos, I'm like, I want to direct that again, like 100%. I think if a company came up to me and said, right, we really want you to direct our show and we want you to choose the show that you put on, I think for me it would be a toss-up between the Mikado and the Sorcerer, because I feel like in my head I've now got such a good concept for both of those that I'd be like, oh, I don't know which one. But I have this idea that I think is so good that I don't even want to share it with you. I've shared it with a couple of people for the Sorcerer, and I know that Sorcerer has so much potential to be this absolutely mind-blowing show, but I do think it's fair to say that it doesn't really rank particularly high in any of the categories, but I don't think it's particularly low in any of them. My newcomers really liked it. They gave it a 4 out of 5. Maybe its chorus didn't do so well, that got a 1.75 out of 5, but honestly, it's pretty like middle of the pack slash better than average for every other category. And I do think it deserves to go above Utopia Limited purely for the fact that its concept and execution I think is just a bit clearer, whereas Utopia Limited, as we were saying, does have these sticking points that a lot of people do find hard to get by. Sorcerer I think is neater and cleaner. It's got really funny, snappy, clean dialogue, and just think about that amazing scene before the quintet. And the quintet, not even talked about the quintet. What an amazing number. So really The Sorcerer is such a great show, but I think it's come quite low on this list just because a lot of people just think of it as like, but they shouldn't. It's really good. Maybe just, it doesn't excel in any one category. And the ones above it, like, all excel in at least one category. Sometimes more. Number 9 was another one that this and the one above it, I almost switched round, but I think that I'm trying to channel the world here and kind of think, right, what would the collective opinion be on this? But I do think it is in the right place because this one got 70.99 out of 100 and the one above it actually got a 76. So that's like a whole 5 points more. So this one I do think definitely deserves to be in this place. It actually almost came below The Sorcerer, but this was an instance where I did a little bit of diddling. I think I upped my enjoyment score of this one just to help it get over The Sorcerer. And this one is Princess Ida. So let's talk about where Ida is really strong. It's music. It doesn't beat the Yeomen of the Guard, but interestingly, the best musical number, I think, is in Princess Ida, and the best number purely for music is also in Princess Ida. Just as a reminder, those were Whom Thou Hast Chained Must Wear His Chain and The World Is But a Broken Toy, respectively. I think those two are just two of the most glorious, emotionally naked songs in the canon, just in terms of emotion, dramaticness. I gave it a 16.67 for that, even though Ida is really not that funny. So considering it's not that funny, I think that's a really good mark. Where Ida falls down, I think, is its dialogue, even though the iambic pentameter is usually successful, sometimes extremely successful. And I love the speech that Hilarion gives to his father, because at that age I had not yet learnt to speak. That's such a great speech, and everything King Garma says is just beautiful. I think he's got some excellent material. The trouble is that he doesn't appear at all in Act 2, and I think that does mean that his role just didn't really do particularly well compared to a lot of the other roles, but I do think he is fantastic. So I love King Garma. But hey, Hilarion and Princess Ida, they are exceptional characters and exceptional roles. Princess Ida came number 4 overall in my best roles, and she is the best traditionally female role, I think, in the canon. Even better than Julia in The Grand Duke, which for me is saying a lot. I think Princess Ida is such a spectacular role and character with such a wonderful arc, and I'd love to get to play her one day. And Hilarion, just similarly, what a beautiful, vulnerable character. Somebody who starts off maybe being, a bit sexist and making the same old tired jokes that the other men in his court are making, and then comes to this place where women are learning and being enthralled by it. It's just such a beautiful thing. And when I do my contrast with the Tennyson poem, I'm going to try and get across to you all just how gentle Hilarion should be, and how after reading that poem, I can't stand the thought of anyone playing Hilarion less than really gentle. I have seen so many like superb professionals play the role of Hilarion, but my favourite Hilarion that has ever been is actually my good friend Oliver McDonnell, who is a member of Forbear Theatre. He played Annabali for us recently, so he plays quite small parts in Forbear Theatre, but I saw him play Hilarion for King's College a few years ago, and honestly, he gave just the best, most honest, most gentle, most vulnerable performance of Hilarion that I've ever seen. And I would say go check that out, but it's over. But maybe there'll be a video of that one day. But honestly, he did that so well. And everyone, all these amazing opera singers should watch Ollie do that and get inspiration from that, because honestly, he's the best Hilarion I've ever seen. And I've seen so many people play that part, like sing it extremely well. But Ollie, mwah, well done, Ollie. So yeah, Ida is a bit problematic. There are elements of Ida that I really, really don't like. And I tried not to let that too much make its way into the scores. It did a little bit, but that's just because sometimes I think the problematic nature is just the director's choice and the actor's choice, but a lot of it is in the writing and you kind of can't get away from it, and it's deliberately meant to be laughed at. So anyone that says to me, well, it's not that's meant to not be funny, like, no, it's meant to be laughed at, and it's meant to mock women. And I am not saying that everybody that watches Princess Ida and laughs at the jokes in it hates women or thinks that women are stupid. I'm not saying that. Those are words that I am not saying. What I am saying is that I think that from a position of privilege, some people can watch Princess Ida, listen to a joke that they think, oh, that's a funny joke, without really thinking that, wait, is there any truth behind that joke? And actually, if there's no truth behind that joke, is it really funny? Or are we just an echo chamber? Like, are we just perpetuating harmful stereotypes? And it might not seem like a big deal to, like, make a joke about women potentially not being very logical. But the thing is, women still today genuinely find it really, really difficult to get into a lot of fields that are associated with men and logic. And women's health concerns are often dismissed by doctors because they seem too emotional, and that they are just seen as, oh, you're just hysterical. Like, women have literally died because of this misconception that women are too emotional and they're not really capable of expressing themselves rationally. So to laugh at that, it might seem harmless, but it actually just perpetuates this wider stereotype, which has wormed its way into the minds of people that actually have the lives of these women in their hands. And I'm not blaming the individuals. I'm not blaming the individual doctors or the individual people that laugh at the jokes. All I'm saying is please just have a think about that. So if you're directing Princess Ida or acting in it, just have a think about that. Just have it in your minds. You don't have to change the world. Just have it there in the corner of your minds. But having said that, I think Princess Ida has a lot of potential. There's a reason I've not directed it yet, because it's just the most problematic one for me. So it needs a lot of thought to make sure that I do it properly. But I think it's got so much potential to be just the most dramatic, heart-rending, emotionally powerful of the GNS operas. And I love its characters. I love its music. And I can't wait to one day do it justice. Number 8 for Best Gilbert and Sullivan Opera, in my opinion, is The Pirates of Penzance. When I initially did this list, so before I decided to do this project, I made a kind of test video where I wasn't planning on being really pedantic and doing lots of them. I just planned to do the one video where I just ranked them myself. And in this video, Pirates of Penzance came second to last, like after Thespis. So it went Thespis Pirates. I really did not rate Pirates at all. And you will probably see from my first few videos, maybe even the first half of this series, that I really wasn't thinking of pirates too highly at all. It often came bottom in many lists, and actually towards the end, it came close to bottom in the music list, and I've often been quite disparaging about its characters, kind of saying that they just focus on duty, it's just the same character over and over again, that it doesn't really have like a very deep concept, it's all about duty and like really how realistic is this. But looking back over all I've done and actually seeing a couple of productions of pirates, being in one throughout the course of making these videos, I think that pirates' strength really comes from just how much it takes you on a journey and immerses you in this world. And even though it's a bit of a strange concept, this topsy-turvy idea that we're all driven by doing our duty and that alone, it is a weird one. And I don't know if I don't know still today if I completely buy that, but I actually think that it's the funniest opera of all of them. The wordplay with orphan and often, the pilot-pirate confusion, just the general earnestness of all the characters when they're saying such ridiculous things, when their priorities are so strange. So the Major General actually being regretful about lying to the pirates that were going to kidnap his daughters. Like, man, you did the right thing. They were going to marry your daughters. They were going to kidnap them and marry them. Like, you did the right thing by lying there, like, that was okay. But then also the idea that the pirates get sad whenever anyone mentions orphans. The whole thing is ridiculous. And it gives every single person on stage the scope to just be really, really silly. I do think that Pirates does suffer a little from having quite a weak opening. This is something that I've said over and over again. I can't really get past how under-energized that opening is. And I think as a director and as actors, it's quite difficult to really get energy into that opening in a different way to say, if you want to know who we are the gentlemen of Japan. Like, that is very much like in your face, whereas this feels like, oh, it's kind of a bit dragging and it's hard to get going. And the subsequent dialogue is very good. I love the dialogue in The Pirates of Penzance. It's extremely funny. It's got a ton of memorable lines in it. I am always quoting the line that Frederick says that is something like, individually, I love you all with a passion unspeakable, but collectively, I look upon you with a disgust that amounts to absolute detestation. And I think that is one of the funniest lines in the canon. I think it is so clever. Everything that happens in the dialogue between Frederick and Ruth, that I have a slight cold, but otherwise I'm quite well. I'm sorry for your cold. And everything with the police and Mabel, it is just absolutely nuts. The whole orphan thing. You said orphan frequently. No, only once. Exactly, you said orphan frequently, only once. It's absolutely mad. So I think that where Utopia and Ida, those are the ones I discussed already on this list that I think this applies to. There's this distance there. There's this feeling that you're not really quite immersed in the story. One thing that the Pirates of Penzance does, it just says, here, come in here to this world. And you just feel, oh, okay, I'm home. Like, I can enjoy this. I can really feel like I am part of this. And I think that is such a special thing. I am not at all confused as to why Pirates is one of the most loved GNS operas. I do think that there are 7 that are overall better than it, and that is just because of the quality of the music and the dialogue and the complexity of the characters. Those just happen to be things that I care about, but I can definitely see why this would be at the top of other people's lists. So number 7 was another surprise for me. I think when I had initially ranked these ones, this was also very low. It was one that I could never really get into, and this is the Gondoliers. As I was saying, what really turned the corner on this for me wasn't bizarrely directing it myself. I think that did help. But what really turned the corner for me was when I did that video with the newcomers to GNS, and they just loved the Gondoliers. They absolutely loved it. Like, whenever I was saying anything, every single twist and turn in the story, they were like, oh, brilliant, oh, great. They were so into it. And that really surprised me, because I suppose that there was a bit of snobbery here. because I do consider myself as a connoisseur of like really good stories, and I like the stories that are really emotionally rich and complex, and I kind of think, oh well, you know, a story's not terribly good if it's shallow. But their reaction to the Gondoliers, and also Pirates as well, really did show me that, well, you know what, maybe I shouldn't be so snobby about this. Maybe, like, sometimes the best story can actually be something very frivolous and doesn't really have to be full of loads of really crazily dramatic stakes. Having said that, though, the Gondoliers does have some dramatic stakes in it. Everything with Lewis and Casilda in Act 1, and the Act 1 finale has got a really gorgeous, deep emotional moment between the quartet. And the Act 2 finale as well, when we see Casilda and Lewis meet again and they realise, oh, we were married the whole time, hooray! And it's very, very exciting and sweet, and everyone's rooting for them, and it's lovely to be in an environment, I mean, whether in the audience or on stage, where you really feel like everyone is truly happy with what's going on and just like happy with the result. And Gondoliers is one of those ones that it's so heartwarming, and it makes me feel really happy at the end of it. It leaves me with feelings of pleasure, as the Act 2 finale says. However, just putting my snobby hat on again, I will say that where Gondoliers falls down for me is the rather weak structure of the narrative in the second half, and just the shallowness of some of the characters. What I love about, say, you know, the Lord Chancellor, he was my favourite character, is that you can really see that his character, he goes on a journey. You can see that he has these walls that break down throughout the course of the opera. But Ginetta, Tessa, Marco and Giuseppe don't change throughout the course of the opera. Their views get challenged, but do they change? No, not really. And is it necessary for characters to change? Probably not, but I do think that generally when characters face adversity and change as a result, and maybe their wants, desires, dreams switch and go onto a different path, like we see with characters like the Lord Chancellor, like we see with Hilarion, like we see with Ludwig in the Grand Duke, for example, where he's this happy-go-lucky guy that all he wants to do is just perform and be the centre of attention, but when he actually gets to be the main centre of attention, i.e. the Grand Duke, it then kind of like falls apart around him. So I think he decides, actually, I don't really want this. So when you can see a character go on a journey, I do think that is just better than when they don't. And the trouble with the Gondoliers is that it's just basically a showcase for happiness and incredible music and a vehicle for excellent choreo. But I don't think that it has the richness that some of the other ones do, and that's why it only came in 7th place. But I do absolutely love the Gondoliers. My mind has been really changed about it, and I'm very happy to see that it's done a little bit better after I have made all of these videos. Number 6 I have given to what is considered to be quite a big favourite in the GNS community, and that one is Ruddigore. This is another one that did kind of middle of the pack to maybe below average in a couple of areas, like music, for example. Even though it's got some sublime musical moments, it had a lot of other kind of quite meh musical moments that brought the average down, and its musical numbers were the same. Even after I took out some of those small numbers and just removed them from the ranking, it still only got a 12.28 out of 20 for music after I normalised all the scores. In some categories, it's done really well. It actually won, if you remember, it won the characters list, but I didn't include the characters in these videos. But still, it also did really well in dramatic comedicness. It got a 19.58 out of 20. So considering the main one got 20, that one did really, really very well indeed. And it also got a 9.6 out of 10 for its leading roles. So even though it only came second in both of those and not first, that's what really brought it up to this position, even though I think that its music and maybe its chorus was also quite middle of the pack. So Ruddigore, there's nothing in it that's weak, but it's just didn't sparkle when it came to music, and some of these other ones just sparkled in more areas than Ruddigore did. But let's just think about its superb strengths. So Ruddigore's dialogue is amazing. It came third for dialogue behind Patience. I'm still debating to myself whether it really should have come third or second and whether it should have beat Patience, but it got 16.94 for its dialogue and Patience got 17.52. It wouldn't have changed its ranking if it had gone above Patience. It wouldn't have changed its ranking overall. But I do think that its dialogue is amazing. Its characters, though, I mean, just get a load of these characters. They're so complex. Rose, who is forced by the demons in her mind, probably as a result of trauma due to being abandoned as a baby, to follow everything in this etiquette book. This is an example of Gilbert giving a character like a really quite horrible neuroticism. Like, Rose is messed up as a character, but that trauma actually just makes her really, really funny. So Rose is this person that has this deep psychological trauma, along with Despard and Mad Margaret and Robin, who I think does have some narcissism, but also has a lot of redeeming qualities as well. I mean, he's clearly a coward, but he also grows and develops courage and fortitude throughout the opera, which is something that we can all identify with. And so Robin as a character, again, he's one of these characters that takes us on this journey. But the fact that all these characters have quite tragic backstories and are all victims of trauma. They've all had something really awful happen to them in their lives, especially these four characters that I've just mentioned. But they also happen as a direct result of that trauma to deliver lines that are very, very funny. And this all comes as something that I go on about all the time. It's connected to the work of this Russian performer who was executed by the Soviet regime in 1940. His name is Meyerhold. I don't know his first name. Let's see if I'm getting this right. Vsevolod Meyerhold. But his thing was all about getting tragedy from comedy and comedy from tragedy, and the kind of lines between the two. He was really a proponent of the belief that actors on stage, their movements should reflect the emotions that they're feeling. And this is something that I think I don't always agree with, but I do think is really important. I think that when it comes to being on the stage, you've really got to play to the back, and that sometimes means like really showing your emotion in your physicality, which is what he was a big fan of. But anyway, this idea of tragedy and comedy and comedy and tragedy, Gilbert was so good at it, especially in Ruddigore. Like the idea that you would laugh at the fact that Rose has this extreme psychological difficulty that means that whenever she is faced with a decision, she just like is drawn back to this book. Even though she's in the midst of this really romantic situation, she still has to look back at her book, to see what the book says, and she can't do anything unless the book says it's okay. Like, that shouldn't be funny, but it is. And we're laughing, but we're kind of laughing because it's something that's relatable but extreme. Like the idea that we are driven by etiquette. And Margaret, again, she's relatable, but an extreme version of something inside all of us. And Despard and Robin, they are also relatable. And that's what is so good about Ruddigore, the characters. The fact that these characters are people that we just root for. Well, we should root for. Because they all have qualities that we have as well. And when people try and be just really obvious about it, oh, Dick Dauntless is such a horrible guy, it's like, well, no, let's just be a bit more nuanced about this. Like, have you never had a conflict between what your head's saying and what your heart's saying? Have you never let down a friend? Have you never chosen love over friendship before? I mean, of course, like, these are things that maybe we've not all done, but are all things that we can relate to, that we know what that feels like. And that's what is so good about Ruddigore, and I'm very glad that it has done well on this list. Number 5 goes to the Yeomen of the Guard. Now this one I thought might do a bit better than this. I thought it would probably end up in more like third place, but really thinking about it, I do think it is fair. Even though Ruddigore totally maxed out the music and the musical numbers, it didn't do so well with its chorus, it didn't do so well with its dialogue. It just got a 12.17 out of 20, because really the dialogue in Yeomen is really not very good at all. I'd say even though it did better than Princess Ida, it was only because there are some spectacular scenes, especially the ones between Phoebe and Wilfred and the one with Fairfax and Elsie. Those are really great scenes. Oh, and Wilfred and Jack Point, and to some extent the Lieutenant and Jack Point as well. So there are some really good scenes, but generally the dialogue is not well written. Like, it doesn't seem like it's been written with a skillful hand. Whereas some of the other operas just have such beautiful turns of phrases. Yeomen doesn't really have that. Some of its sentence construction is very sloppy and clunky, whereas that makes it seem maybe a bit more real than the other ones. Some of it, I do think, was a bit lazy. That like stupid, ridiculously long sentence that Meryl has to say. So really, Yeomen did suffer as a result of that. And that's what brought it down to 5th place. That's why it didn't come any higher. But let's just talk about the music. Where do I begin? When a wooer goes a-wooing, everything in the Act 2 finale, everything in the Act 1 finale, there is not a more perfect Act 1 finale. I had actually thought when we did the videos that the Princess Ida Act 2 finales won that for me, but in retrospect, I do think that the Yeomen Act 1 finale really is definitely the best one. I adore every single part of it. I think I'd thought that the first part of it was a bit dull, but musically, it is sublime. 'Tis ever thus, whenever valour true is found, true modesty will there abound. It's barbershop harmonies. And Meryl's solo as well. Forgive his aging father's pride, nor jeer his aged father's sympathetic tear. It's really nice, the music of that bit. I'd not really ever stopped to think about how gorgeous that is, but it's lovely. I love that bit that Meryl sings. And I mean, my absolute favourite musical moment in the whole of Yeomen is The Prisoner Comes to Meet His Doom. And the moment before that, where it just has this sudden shift of, oh, hello, Daenerys. It has a sudden shift between Monta afternoon for not to do, grant that doom. And then it's just this complete shift of mood. And it's one of the most beautiful moments in the canon for me. Alas, I waver to and fro, Tower Warders, Nyta spread her pall once more. I mean, these are all just the most rich, emotionally glorious moments in the canon, and I absolutely love it. I mean, honestly, there's a reason that Yeomen just completely dwarfed the others when it came to music and musical numbers. That's why it's so high on this list. It is a little bit regretful that it didn't do maybe 1 or 2 higher, but I do think the ones above it are just better all-rounders than Yeomen. Yeomen really does just have the one extreme strength, and that is the music. Its characters are also great, but the average is dragged down by a couple of characters that aren't so good, or roles, I should say. Meryl and Dame Carruthers are not so great, but certainly Jack Point, Elsie Maynard, Phoebe, Wilfred, they're all brilliant. Maybe another downside, maybe where Ruddigore is better than this one, or maybe some of the other ones that came above it are better, is that Yeomen does seem to feel, especially in the second half, very much geared towards, oh, this is a tragedy about Jack Point. And that's kind of what you're meant to feel at the end. And you feel that it kind of renders some of the other characters a bit useless towards the end, because yeah, they do get an ending, but it does really seem like the whole thing is just geared towards people feeling sorry for Jack Point. And that's fine, but it does err as being a bit self-indulgent. I think it's very important as a result of that to make Jack Point earn the audience's sympathy, because if you don't earn sympathy for Jack Point, what on earth are you doing? That ending is going to fall so flat. And I've seen that before. And I'll say this, it's a professional production, so I don't mind saying negative things about professional productions. I remember there was a Carl Rosa production back, must have been 2006, or possibly 2007, maybe it was 2007, where their Jack Point was just a drunkard and was just a bit unpleasant the whole way through. And it meant you felt literally nothing at the end, other than, oh, this is a sad individual. And like, what does that say? Like, what are we doing? Yeah, there are some people that are beyond help and are tragic. But you don't see him grow. You don't see him have a point where things turn for him. You don't see the tragedy of it because he was a tragic figure at the start. Like, there was never any... If there's not any hope to begin with, then where's the tragedy? You know, it's just, you have to give people hope. Otherwise, when the tragedy comes, they don't care. And I thought that was a really poor decision. But that show aside, I adore Yeomen of the Guard. I'm really looking forward to directing it for the Grosvenor Light Opera Company, both in London in June and at the GNS Festival on the 29th of July. So if you are at the festival, come early and see that show, because that'll be a show that I have directed, and I'm very excited about that one. Number 4 goes to Iolanthe. This was a show that had done fairly middle of the pack, sometimes actually below average on a lot of my lists, but it started to do a lot better towards the end. It was boosted by the fact that the Lord Chancellor is my very favourite character in the canon. The roles, I mean, I think it came quite middle of the pack. We got an 8... Well, no, actually, it did pretty well in roles. It got an 8.74 out of 10 for its leading roles and a 3.73 out of 5 for its supporting roles. It did not so great for music. It only got a 13.94 out of 20, and it got a 14.66 for its dialogue. So it didn't do spectacularly well in any category apart from its choruses, which I gave a 4.42 out of 5 for, and it got a 20 out of 20 for its dramatic/comedicness, because it won that category. And remember, I stretched all the results, so the top one got the maximum marks. It appealed to the newcomers. I myself gave it a 3.5 out of 5 for its enjoyment. Iolanthe is one of these all-rounders. It's not weak in any area. I would say it has weak moments. I don't particularly like the scene with Phyllis and the peers in Act 1. I don't particularly like When All Night Long a Chat Remains, or When Britain Really Ruled the Waves. I find those tend to slow the piece down. But I wouldn't suggest cutting them. I just think they're things that people really need to think about, how you're going to make these interesting when you do them. But where Iolanthe just shimmers, it's its all-roundedness and just the emotional stakes of the characters and how funny it manages to be despite the seriousness of a lot of the situations depicted in it. So, first of all, I mean, obviously, the scene with the Lord Chancellor and Iolanthe at the end of Act 2 is, I think, the most dramatically and emotionally moving moment in the whole canon. Prisoner Comes to Meet His Doom is also pretty moving, but that's a whole chorus thing. This is 2 individuals. These are individuals that we have followed throughout the course of the opera. Maybe it would have been a bit more moving had Iolanthe been a bit more of a vibrant character, but certainly the music alone, the music and the lyrics and just the space that it gives the director and the performers to just make that like a really still, powerful moment. It is just truly the epitome of the canon for me, that moment. I think a lot of people would agree with me there. Not to mention, both choruses are superb. The Fairies chorus and Pia's chorus are both just so vivid. You've got fairies who have the scope for so much choreography, so much movement, so much fun, silliness. They interact so much with the principals, so there's a lot for the chorus to do. When I played Fleeta, I was never bored. I was never just standing around waiting for principals to say their words. I was constantly engaged in what was going on. And it's not like some of these like Citizens chorus and Yeomen where there's moments where they're literally just standing and singing and they're not particularly emotionally connected. In Iolanthe, the choruses are so good. The Pia's chorus, they're so smug and proud and bombastic and grand. It's just an absolute treat for any performer who's, you know, maybe if you're not even usually in the chorus and you're just in the chorus for that one. I remember that in Savoynet, so I played Fleeta and Will was in the chorus, and both of us had such a great time. We absolutely loved that production. It was directed by Gary Slavin, who's amazing, obviously, but that production we both had such a good time in because there's just so much you can do. I do think Strephon and Phyllis might have some problems. I think the way they relate to each other can often be played in a way that makes them unlikable. Whereas I think that if you really push the immaturity of them and just make them a bit childish, you kind of get around it that way. But I love Strephon and Phyllis. I love the Lord Chancellor. Talala and Mount Tara maybe aren't so very vivid characters, but as roles, they've got a lot of material. I think they're really fun. There's a lot they have to do. If you go in, that's a great trio. There's just such life and such glittering fun in Iolanthe. So even if it's not particularly sparkling in any other area apart from its dramatic and comedicness, it definitely deserves to be very high up on this list just because of the sheer joy that it brings to everyone that sees it and its general all-roundedness. So well done, Iolanthe. In third place, we have Patience. Now, Patience has always been one of my favourites when it comes to story and when it comes to characters. I think it's a little bit like Iolanthe. It's very much like an all-rounder, but I do think it does not quite match up to Iolanthe when it comes to dramatic comedicness. I did give it a 17.78, so it got a really high score for that, but that's mostly for its comedicness. I do think that Patience has a few little sticking points in that Patience's character arc and the general concept of love being unselfish is a little bit problematic. I don't think it's very clear why she makes the choices she's making in the second half, because she seems to be this noble character, but then she's angry with Grosvenor for not being beautiful anymore. It's really odd. Go, I shall never set eyes on you again. You know, there can be nothing unselfish in loving a person who is, like, now ugly because he's conventional. Like, come on, Patience wouldn't do that. She loves Grosvenor. It just seems a bit shallow to me, I think. But apart from that one element, I think everything about Patience is brilliant. I think its music is actually better than Iolanthe. I gave it a 15.12 for its music. Its choruses, I actually only gave it a 2.3 because the Dragoons kind of drag down the Rapturous Maidens, who I think are wonderful. For its musical numbers, it got an 8.87, so really, really well done for its musical numbers. And its dialogue, of course, it got a really high mark for its dialogue as well. My personal enjoyment of it, I gave that a 4 out of 5. And the newcomers gave it a 2.5, so it came quite middle of the pack there. But honestly, where Patience's strengths lie, to me, is just the cleverness of its wordplay. I think that when it comes to just wittiness and cleverness, I think it's the best one. Its dialogue is exceptional. The bit with Grosvenor and the maidens is so funny. Grosvenor and Bunthorne, that scene. And of course, one of my favourite scenes in the canon, I think it came number 3 or number 4, is the scene between Grosvenor and Patience when they meet for the first time after many years. Like, that is just full of such clever stuff. There's nothing to prevent your loving me. I'm plain, homely, unattractive. Why, that's true. It's just so utterly brilliant. But surely that doesn't make you unhappy. Yes, Patience, cursed as I am with the beauty. I absolutely love it. Bunthorne's poem, his, like, empty words. Grosvenor's poems. Every single character and scene between people is so well constructed and crafted. When we think of maybe some earlier operas where the characters weren't so well defined. So yeah, Pirates, what a brilliant show. Let's think of that scene in Pirates with Edith, Kate and Isabel. That, oh, it was a very place for mermaids. Brilliant. Love every bit of that scene. I laugh at every line. But think about that and the way those characters interact. They're not really characters. They are all kind of the same thing and they're all doing a thing which is funny. Whereas in Patience, the comedy comes from who the characters are and what drives those characters and then how they interact with one another. The character of Grosvenor, like, being this absolutely earnest, very serious poet who was actually a terrible poet but has no idea, but he tries so hard. And that's always funny. And how Patience just absolutely adores him, and that's just so precious. And then Bunthorne, who's actually really likeable, even though he's like not a great guy. You just root for him in a way because he's just so clever, the way he gets one over on these really posh people and these maidens who obviously just don't understand what art is. And, oh, art, we thank thee for this boon. You know, the rapturous maidens. I mean, my God, they are just some of the funniest lines in the canon come from these ladies. Lady Jane, fools and blind, the man loves, wildly loves, who, none of us. His strange fancy has lighted for the nonce on Patience, the village milkmaid. On Patience it cannot be. And it's just, they're so extreme. And every single emotion in Patience is just so big. Everything is extreme in Patience, and that's what has made it do so well. It's just excellently constructed, such a charming story, maybe with a tiny bit of a problematicness at the end with Patience, which I mentioned, but just such a charming story. Moments of extreme tenderness, like with Lady Jane's song, and with Patience and Grosvenor in that scene, and Patience's subsequent aria. There's so much that really pulls at your heartstrings, but then just a moment later, you're howling with laughter again. It's just one of the most perfect ones there is in terms of being well balanced and just making you laugh and making you feel things and saying something about society, saying something about following fads, about how funny it is when people don't really get what's good and what's not when it comes to art. When I see people kind of clearly pretending to understand something which is nonsense, like Bunthorne's poem, it does give me a lot of catharsis as a performer. Number 2 for best Gilbert and Sullivan opera, in my opinion, is The Grand Duke. Now, I'm going to tell you something. When I first did this ranking, The Grand Duke came in at number 1, but that was before I'd normalised the results. That was before I added my own enjoyment score in. This one ended up getting 84.65 out of 100, but the number 1 got 85.42. So it was actually less than a mark between these two. And the fact that I gave this one a 4.5, my own personal enjoyment score, and the one above it a 5, I think helped a bit. But I also think that when I normalised the scores, that made the one above it do a tiny bit better, which just edged it over the Grand Duke. So I do think that it's important that this didn't come number 1, because I think that if it had, I would have felt disingenuous about that. And I think that other people would have thought that this list was disingenuous, because when you think about it, the Grand Duke is known as one of the ones that fails, so how could that possibly be the best one? But I do think it is the second best. And maybe people are still thinking, you know, why is that done so well? Like, how could the general consensus be so wrong about it? Well, let me talk about the weaknesses first. The plot is a bit of a mess. Much like Thespis, much like maybe even the Yeomen of the Guard, much like little bits of Patience, and much like the one we've not talked about yet. There's not really a solid through concept of the Grand Duke. Maybe it is something I mentioned earlier. Maybe it is just the ambitions of Ludwig just coming to bite him in the bum, like after he actually gets what he wants. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's just, oh, this is a funny situation. Let's see what happens if this happens. But then something else happens which is even funnier and unexpected. Maybe just in those days when the Grand Duke was made, the fashion was to have kind of loose narratives strung together by brilliant show-stopping musical numbers. So the Grand Duke did exactly what it was supposed to do at the time when it was made. I do think it's a bit more successful than Utopia Limited. I think Utopia Limited has a very strong concept, but the Grand Duke, I just think, manages to keep people's attention. Even though maybe its narrative seems quite hard to follow, every bit of it actually is quite clear. When I was doing my dialogue video, I found that each scene, you know what's going on. And maybe there's some bits that are a bit extraneous, but really not too many. I would maybe cut a total of about 10 lines from the Grand Duke when I direct it again. Like, there's not a lot of extraneous material. The trouble that a lot of people have with the Grand Duke, and this is something I discovered when I was doing my dialogue video, is that I think that a lot of people don't really believe in the reality of these characters. But being a neurodivergent person, I think it's really helped me get into the mindset of these characters. So I really get what it is to be a clown like Ludwig. I really get what it is to be quite narcissistic like Julia. I get what it is to be cripplingly shy and a people pleaser like Lisa, because as part of my mood disorder, I actually fluctuate between all of these things like very quickly and easily. So I can feel like God and the worst person in the world within an hour of each other. That's just the nature of the particular disorder that I have. And I have help. I also don't drink alcohol, which really helps me kind of center myself. But the fact is that as a person who suffers from a mood disorder and is neurodivergent, I do get these characters, and I think that helps me as a performer and a director to really get across that these characters do mean what they are saying. They're not just frivolous characters. When I've seen productions of the Grand Duke before, and I'm thinking particularly of the National GNS Opera Company production in 2012. I didn't see that live, I just watched it on GS Opera TV. But I found that even though each individual performer in it is fantastic, like, oh, Charlotte Page, she was wonderful. And Victoria Byron in the bit where Lisa realises that she can't marry Ludwig and that Julia's going to, that is really heartrending. I think that was done really well. I do think there's like a general disconnect between the characters and what they're saying sometimes. The trouble that they had with it is that when they read the lines, it came across as really serious and kind of quite dark. And I think it didn't really help that the lighting was also quite dark in that one. I mean, perhaps it was just a problem with the recording. But I found that for a show that I consider to be extremely vibrant, I found that one quite flat. And I don't really quite know why. But because when I envisage the Grand Duke, it's just so colourful and bright and exciting, with so many wild emotions and dramatic stuff going on. I mean, these are actors. They're full of emotion, they're full of dramaticness and stylizations. But I found they were a bit too real for me. I found they weren't stylized enough, maybe. And I think perhaps that is maybe why people don't think the Grand Duke is good. It's because they are seeing the Grand Duke as like a serious play, when really it is meant to be funny. The lines are meant to be hilarious, but there is also tragedy nestled betwixt that comedy as well. It's characters. Now, there's some kind of weak ones. I don't think Ernest or Lisa or even the Baroness and Rudolph are particularly engaging. Rudolph should be, but the trouble is he kind of disappears and doesn't really appear again, and you kind of lose him, I think, in Act 2. However, Ludwig and Julia, these are two of the greatest characters in the canon. Julia as being a person who, I've said this before, but I really relate to her as being a person who, like, she's not driven by romance or sex. Like, Julia is driven by her ambition, her career ambition to be the greatest actress, to have the best role. And she does happen across like romantic circumstances in the middle of that, but the interesting thing is that she is never the driving force behind it. And she does get with Ernest in the end. And I think a part of that isn't because she's necessarily attracted to him, but it's just that she finds in him like a kindred spirit. She finds in him somebody who is also kind of out of place. And there's something really heartwarming about the idea that they really could learn to love each other, not necessarily in like a romantic or sexual way, but they could really learn to love each other at the end of the show. So I think that the fact that I do see Julia as kind of asexual certainly does not mean that she couldn't love Ernest at the end of it, and that doesn't kind of take away from that asexualness that I do associate with Julia. But her, do you see this bit of hair here? It won't go away. There we go. But her section where she shows to Ludwig that she is capable of playing that part, again, nothing to do with the story. It doesn't matter, though, in this instance. That it is just a wonderful piece. And that's what the Grand Duke is. It's showstopper after showstopper. 10 minutes since. Your Highness has a party at the door. The sausage roll song. All of the Act 1 finale. So ends my dream. I believe to be the greatest soprano aria in all of GNS. Yes, there are some forgettable songs too. Rider King and Very Truth. As our penny roll, we sing You're a Pretty Kind of Fellow. These are songs that I don't think are amazing compared to a lot of the other songs in the canon. But most of the songs, like the opening of Act 2, I mean the opening of Act 1 to a certain extent as well. Grand Duke is full of absolutely sparkling numbers. Its rolls are incredible. Yeah, there are some weak ones, but most of its rolls are great. It is absolutely hilarious. This man ate 3 sausage rolls. Keep that fact steadily before your mind. 3 large sausage rolls. Bah, lots of people eat sausage rolls who are not conspirators. Well, they shouldn't. It's bad form. Lines like that, which are so stupid. Like, it's really, really stupid. But the characters believe what they are saying. But if you don't believe what you're saying as an actor, then that's not going to come across, and it's going to come across flat. And I think that's the issue with the Grand Duke. It's a step to kind of make these characters believable. But if you can do it, I think the Grand Duke really deserves to be the second best opera in the canon, maybe even the best if you do it right. But coming in first place is the Mikado. This overall has certainly proved to be my absolute favourite Gilbert and Sullivan opera. I started to realise quite early on that it was just topping most of the lists. I mean, even if it didn't win every list, all of its numbers just came really high. I noticed that Titwillow and Young Man Despair and Our Great Mikado Virtuous Man all did super well in the baritone arias. The altos arias are all amazing. The sopranos aria didn't do maybe so well, but the tenors aria I absolutely adore, I mean, especially musically. A Wandering Minstrel is just one of the most incredible things in the canon. It's just so vivid and so musically vibrant, even if it has nothing to do with the story. Where I think the Mikado does have some weak spots, I don't think its story is that clear if you're just relating the story to a person. My newcomers actually gave this a flat out 0, so Mikado got a 0 after I kind of approximated the corresponding percentage score to a mark out of 5. And it only gets, get this, a 0.65 out of 5 for its chorus. The Mikado has the worst choruses, like combined, I think, of any of the operas, because the choruses just don't seem to be particularly emotionally invested in anything that's going on. I do think the Gentlemen of Japan actually are way better than the Schoolgirls. I think they have much more interesting music to sing, but again, neither chorus is particularly invested. The Act 1 finale, I think they do get a bit emotionally involved, but they are just essentially standing there singing, really. So that is something where I think the Mikado does fall down, and where the Grand Duke actually, the Grand Duke got a 5 out of 5 for its choruses, because the Grand Duke just has the best chorus in the canon. But, oh my god, the dialogue in Mikado gets a 20 out of 20. The music gets a 15.8, and the musical numbers get a 9.8 out of 10. So, especially musical numbers has done so well. Dramatic comedicness gets a 19.17. A 19.17 out of 20, so that's done extraordinarily well. Its leading roles get a 10 out of 10. The Mikado, certainly with the Patagai, the tenor, it does, I think, combined have the best leading roles in the canon, and its supporting roles get a 5 out of 5, and I gave it a 5 out of 5 for my own personal enjoyment. I just think the Mikado, its problematic nature aside, which we don't even have to talk about because I fixed it now. I will never use the names again. I would certainly appear in a show that uses the names, it depending on where that show was. So like if it was at the festival where most of the audience have seen the Mikado before and they know what it is, I wouldn't mind saying the name so much. I think if it was going to be in London and a lot of new audiences were going to be seeing it, I really wouldn't feel comfortable using the names as an actor. But certainly as a director, I'll never use the names again. I will never use the setting of Japan again. There's no point, because it's just as good set somewhere else. And I don't think, controversial opinion, I do not think the Mikado should ever have a framing device. Because when these characters do not mean what they are saying, it really takes away from the dramatic comedicness of it. The trouble with Mikado is, and I thought this before I started making these videos, I thought that the Mikado was a bit frivolous, because I thought that the tenor and soprano especially were quite frivolous characters. They didn't really particularly care too much about what was going on, even though there's life and death on the line. The lines they're saying don't seem to be terribly concerned about the situation. But I realised that that's actually not true. I just misinterpreted that because I think a lot of people play it in like a very stylised way. Yes, I was certain of it directly I heard you play. Whereas if you say it earnestly, well, yes, I was certain of it directly I heard you play. You know, you can mean the lines you're saying. And I think that this is done particularly well in the 1966 version of the Mikado. If you watch that, even though it's horrendously racist, if you watch that, like every character is like very earnest with the words they're saying. They really mean what they're saying. And it really just made me think so differently about the Mikado. So not only is its music gorgeous, I think it only came 6th for music, but still that's pretty high. But its dialogue is just the absolute best in the canon. I think it's got the funniest dialogue in the canon and just the best dialogue in the canon, in my opinion. Its lyrics, look at the Lord High Everything Else's song. It's a hopeless case, as you may see, and in your place, away I'd flee. But don't blame me, I'm sorry to be of your pleasure a diminutioner. They'll vow their pact extremely soon, in point of fact this afternoon. Her honeymoon with that buffoon at 7 commences, so you shun her. It's so stupid. I think that this is, it's so aware of itself, these lyrics. However, the writing is aware of itself, but the characters need not be. The characters can absolutely mean every word of what they're saying here. And just I'm going to keep using the word earnest, but that's just the best way I can describe the tenor. The tenor and soprano love each other so much. The way that these lines are, like, it's made me think about these lines so differently. So when they're talking about the fact that he's going to be beheaded in a month, they mean that, you know, that's like something that's going to happen. But he wanted to marry her anyway, because that's how much he loves her. And that is so often just played for laughs and thrown away. But the stakes in the Mikado are just, they should be so real and so high, and life and death. And the richness of these characters, the hilarity of them, the absurdity of them, but also the fact that you're rooting for every single one of them. Even the Patter guy, even though he's a character that I think people might not like so much, you can definitely relate to him and his cowardice. You can see why he does the things that he does. And it's challenging, because he does do some really quite horrendous things, like essentially convincing a person who'd maybe decided they weren't going to unalive themselves, but he convinces them, oh no, actually, yeah, you should. If you think about it, that's awful. But also you can relate to his cowardice. You can relate to his absolute desire to save his own life at any cost. And that is something we can relate to, even though it might be troublesome to admit that to ourselves. It's true. Most of us are like that. Most of us, when put in the Patagai's situation, would do exactly what he's doing. And the tenor, he's such a hero. And the soprano song, which I previously thought, wasn't that deep. It's just so glorious, lyrically and musically. She borrows light that through the night mankind may all acclaim her, and truth to tell, she lights up well, so I for one don't blame her. It's cute, it's adorable, but she's so engaging, and you know who she is, like she's talking to you. So whereas maybe you feel like in operas that I think are great, like Utopia Limited and Princess Ida, I don't feel like they're talking to you in the same way that characters maybe in Mikado and Pirates are talking to you. But all of these characters, they want you to understand who they are. And the fact that you've got this glorious, energetic music to go along with it, the opening, Behold the Lord High Executioner. Even though I do consider it probably the weakest chorus, I don't know if it actually has to be. I think there are ways to get the chorus engaged with what's going on. You can get them more engaged with the tenor's aria at the start. You can get them more engaged with the alto's entrance in the Act 1 finale. There are ways you can get them so they're not just singing wallpaper. There are things you can do to help the Mikado. And I am not surprised that it ended up as #1. I didn't know this was going to be the case at all. When I first made this list a year ago, before I did any of these videos, the Mikado, I think, came like number 7 or 8. I honestly hadn't ranked it that highly. And so I'm so glad that I have done this series, because what this series has done for me, is that it's not made me think of any of them less. It's only made me think of them more. So while some people might think that it's not good for me to rank elements of these operas, because it will always mean that some of them come last, I agree that's a shame. But at the same time, as I say, me getting to know these operas better, like to the extent that I've known them, hasn't made me think less of any of them. I've not looked deeply into any of them and gone, oh, well, that was worse than I thought. Operas have only become better than I thought as a result of making this list. HMS Pinafore, even though that came close to bottom, I absolutely adore it. I wouldn't say I adore Thespis, but I think it's definitely got potential and I'm very fond of it. But I adore pretty much every opera on this list. And even though some have ranked low, that doesn't mean that I can't think of a way to do them which would be absolutely spellbinding. And it has really helped me. This series has helped me so much in understanding these operas and understanding myself as a performer, as a director. I have got so much better as a performer as a result of making these videos. And so for that alone, I'm just so happy that I've done that and that this series is complete. However, Four-Bear Theatre is not going away. We have loads of exciting things planned, which I will announce in the forthcoming videos. But as for this series, it is now over. And I really hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know if you thought it would go any differently, if you think that your favourite has been unfairly treated, if you think that I thought maybe one was too good and it should have been lower down. Let me know in the comments. I'm always happy to know what you guys all think of what I'm doing. But thank you very much for watching, for subscribing, for donating if you've donated, and I will see you for the next one.